It is often the case that we are eaten up from within by doubt and driven by our own industry attitudes. We refuse to look at the world clearly. Vanessa Sebastian's husband often suspected his wife of cheating on him, based on how open she could make conversation with men, flirt, and most importantly, really be interesting to the opposite sex. At the same time, being married, he knew that Vanessa was a truly beautiful and charismatic girl, 22 years old, well-groomed, confident, and self-aware. All these qualities incredibly adorned such a fragile-looking person. Sebastian was in love with Vanessa as the most expensive trophy on the planet, which a house. Of course, you do not want to share with anyone. Vanessa, on the other hand, loved her husband unselfishly, tenderly. There was no passion and feelings, but there was something real, calm, and comfortable in it. Perhaps Vanessa had grown up long ago and wanted for herself a cozy stability, which she could notice in Sebastian. Either way, they both loved each other, but in their own way. They had been married for a year. Their union could not be called perfect, but happy. At first sight, quite possibly. The newlyweds almost never quarreled, always tried to listen to each other and come to a common opinion. But there was one significant flaw in their relationship, which had the property to grow every day and immerse in its devilish embrace all the good that can surround it. Envy. Who would have thought that a husband would be jealous of his wife? But unfortunately, that's what happened. Sebastian envied the beauty and charming Vanessa, all reproached himself for choosing such a bride. If he had married someone simpler, he would not have had to suffer nights of doubt about his wife's fidelity. The roots of his insecurity came not from the real reality
that Vanessa every day throws hints of betrayal left and right, but from the fact that Sebastian himself considered himself unworthy of his wife and did not believe that a woman like her could really love him.
Isn't that what envy is? We find flaws in ourselves. We dare to have the great audacity to consider ourselves unworthy of anything or anyone. And then we look at the people around us who have not been labeled unworthy and think, would I like to be like him? So worthy, when envy was still too small to be eradicated. Sebastian met a neighbor in the stairwell. Since moving in, the newlyweds hadn't had time to get to know all the neighbors, but Wendy was hard not to remember. Rajenko was a young girl of about 19 who lived under Alsop. That was the last name the newlyweds now bore. All the inhabitants of the entrance of the older generation were constantly talking about the red-headed neighbor, say, the man brings to his home. And each time different Vanessa Sebastian feared to speak out about it because they did not know this girl at all. Moreover, at first glance, she seemed to them seemed to them a very nice neighbor, especially Sebastian. Wendy knew how to make eyes at her, but Vanessa only laughed at her and, embarrassed by the look of her husband, knew that Sebastian was not going anywhere. One day, the whole entryway witnessed Wendy getting married. Curious gossip that the girl would not stop leading a lascivious life and condemning the unfortunate guy to torment spread around the neighborhood very quickly. Vanessa stayed out of other people's lives, and Sebastian wondered. Sharpened ears hastily pull back the gossip brewing at the entryway. And so, as previously stated, shortly before the vacation for which the newlyweds had been saving together, Sebastian, returning home from work, meets Wendy sitting in tears on the stairs in the entryway. "What's wrong?" Sebastian asked worriedly, leaning slightly toward his neighbor. There he went, without stopping. "Sobbing," replied Wendy. "Who doesn't understand, Sebastian? Who's who?" "My husband," the girl said hysterically, laughing at her own grief. The man looked around awkwardly, as if doing something shameful, illegal, and sitting down on the step next to Wendy, lightly put his arm around her shoulders in reassurance. The girl willingly bumped Sebastian in the shoulder and spoke. Believed the rumors. "Imagine I couldn't stand it," she said. Her words were hard to make out because Wendy was talking into Sebastian's jacket, choking back tears, so the man had to tilt his head closer to her to hear. "I know I'm far from perfect, but I'm human too. I didn't cheat on him, she screamed, as if Sebastian was the last person on Earth worth appearing guilty of anything. Why are you sitting here at Eero 100? It's cold. Why don't you go home? Suddenly, the man asked me a caring question. I was confused. Girl, I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. She exclaimed, emerging again under her nose into the folds of Sebastian's jacket. The man was taken aback and began to stroke the girl's red hair awkwardly. Let me walk you out, Sebastian asked. The neighbor's sobs suddenly stopped. Without ceasing, tears came down your nose. Wendy looked up at the man, still not releasing the edge of Sebastian's jacket from her tenacious grip. She stared into his eyes for a few seconds, like a child begging him for a new toy. Then, Wendy, moving slightly closer to the man's face, suggested that maybe you should come over to my place. Sebastian was taken aback and became agitated, hastened to pull away. Alarmed, shifted in his hand tie. And instead of I cannot, averting aside his eyes, tried to pick up words, man. The girl moved even closer to the unhappy Sebastian, completely squeezing him into the wall. Perhaps you misunderstood me. The girl hastened to justify herself. I need support now more than ever. I'm so lonely, I can't do it alone, Wendy exclaimed. To get a man to go with her? Sebastian was overcome with anxiety. On the one hand, she was an inexperienced little girl who might not be able to cope with a painful breakup. But on the other hand, how would his wife react if she knew that he would just take and go home to the neighbor, who in addition has the fame of a girl of easy behavior? The man, leaning against the wall who had been sitting, rose to his feet, adjusted his wrinkled jacket, and went down a few steps for his briefcase. Then he turned to the bewildered neighbor and hurried to get out of the situation, saying, Instead of me at home waiting for my wife, I cannot go with you. All men are the same. In the spirit of the pike, exclaimed the girl, I do not sleep you with me. I suggest you just hang around. Your wife can wait. Sebastian blanked her eyes, as if by her refusal she would ruin the life of the sufferer. I'm sorry, Sebastian mumbled inaudibly under his breath, and bypassing the girl, began to climb the stairs. Then he heard the pitiful sobs again. Turning around, the man saw Wendy wrapping her arms around her legs and leaning her head in her lap. Her unhappy all the time within her was resolutely beginning to turn into a thrust and flow of tears. The young man stopped doubtful. Go up to your place. It will freeze. After all, it's fall. Sebastian made another attempt to reason with the girl. She didn't react. She only burst into tears. The man approached the neighbor, took her under his arm, and tried to lift her to her feet. Come on, get up, Sebastian muttered to his wife. Wendy broke out of his careful grip, stood up herself, and turning to him with a tear-stained face, exclaimed, Do you believe the rumors too? What on earth are you talking about? Sebastian was stunned. Why don't you want to come with me? The voice turned to a shout. No, not at all, either, shrieked the young man. But of course offended. Wendy turned away. All right, I'll come in for a bit. The man gave in. Wendy looked up at him in admiration, as if she knew Sebastian would eventually agree. Grabbing the man's hand, the girl pulled him up to the second floor toward her apartment. Sebastian couldn't find a place to sit. He wondered what he was doing here and why he could not refuse the unfortunate neighbor. Time was running out. Instead of hurriedly hustled in the kitchen to make tea for the guest. And Sebastian sat in the living room on the sofa, impatiently waiting for the girl. I thought he was normal, so I married him. Had I known that he did not have that masculine core in him, overheard the conversation of neighbors from the first floor, and believed every word, imagine pouring boiling water into mugs, telling Wendy the story of her divorce. The girl spoke loudly so that Sebastian, who was behind the wall, could hear her. After a couple minutes, a red-haired girl appeared in the passage of the living room with a tray in her hands. She brought the candy and tea to the glass tables, never stopping to rant about her ex-husband. And when I met you, things were very different, weren't they? Me? Wendy, the man called out to the girl. Wendy froze in the same pose in which she was placing the tray of dishes on the table, at the same moment. The man's gaze inadvertently fell on the girl's breasts, which were almost bare because of the revealing shirt in which Wendy had met Sebastian in the entryway. The man quickly pulled himself away from the wrong thoughts that had popped into his head. Looked the girl straight in the eyes instead of you, the man stammered. How do you feel while you're around? Good! Under his breath, Wendy gave out. Sebastian was embarrassed. But I can't be with you for too long. Nervously adjusting his tie, he said. Wendy, visibly penetrated, slowly pulled away from Sebastian, awkwardly putting her hands behind her back, and repeated the man's last words as if to convince herself that you can't. Sebastian visibly began to breathe more freely, and allowed himself to relax a little, and stop pressing himself against the back of the couch as if he wanted to merge with it. Not sadness. If you are, there's still someone in the world you'll be happy with. Cheer up, Sebastian exclaimed. At that second, the girl raised her eyes to the man, looking at him with a kind of challenge. Do you think so? You got off, said Wendy. Well, of course, Sebastian added. The girl smiled as she thought for a moment. Sebastian, noticing her smile, was so excited about the idea of making someone's life better by providing support in times of need. He immediately began to rant about the psychology of relationships and tried to support the weight. The girl stood motionless, only looking at Sebastian with shining eyes. You know, it's normal for two people to break up. I think everyone's been through it. But don't despair, the man didn't stop talking. You're right. In between Sebastian's enthusiastic speeches, Wendy said, and untied the thin lace of her translucent tunic, exposing the top of her body, then the bottom. Sebastian watched the girl with round, shocked eyes until the lacy gown fell to her feet. Wendy began to slowly thrust herself at the man, carefully stepping over the leg. What are you doing? Stunned, the man staggered back. What do you mean, what? Wendy asked in a mesmerizing voice. Looking for someone to be happy with. Isn't that how you do it? Putting aside all doubts, the girl resolutely threw herself at Sebastian, her whole body spilling out onto him. No, not like that at all, exclaimed the frightened young man, and made an attempt to free himself from the naked neighbor girl looming over him. Sebastian grabbed the girl by the waist and pushed her back onto the bed, and started running toward the exit, hitting a mug of tea on the way, which immediately flew down. It shattered into large shards, spilling its contents onto the linoleum. I'm sorry, Sebastian muttered before slamming the front door behind him. Sebastian did not tell Vanessa what had happened at the redhead neighbor's apartment. That evening, the wife thought that her husband might have been late for work and did not suspect anything. In Sebastian's mind, the image of Wendy often surfaced. Sebastian didn't want or intend to cheat on his wife. But it was worth it. Think of his neighbor, as the body began to beat a small shiver, because his thoughts were something forbidden, undesirable. It stirred the mind and made the blood flow faster through the veins. The man did not think that something like this would ever happen to him. Time passed. Summer came. Sebastian and Vanessa invested all their money savings for a desired vacation. Together, they went to the sea, booked a cottage at a campground near the coast, and neither of them wanted to think about anything else but a legal vacation. On the second hot day of their vacation, the couple headed to the sea. Vanessa is not a fan of being in the water for a long time. It exhausts her. Therefore, the girl, a little and hoarded, waited and back to the chaise lounge. Leaving Sebastian alone with the waves of the sea suited him just fine. Sebastian loved to put on an underwater mask and go down to the bottom to look at sea creatures. This is what the young man did. Vanessa sat on a chaise lounge and sunbathed, occasionally glancing at her husband. The man dived in and out, waving some shell in his hands, just to show Vanessa his find. The girl could not hold back a smile as she watched her husband. He surfaced once again. Sebastian looked at Vanessa again and found that next to his wife, there was a strange man, who came up obviously not to ask about the location of the toilet. The young man was having a casual conversation with Vanessa. Every now and then, he touched her shoulder. The girl did not look tense. On the contrary, she smiled, looking into the stranger's eyes, laughing openly at his jokes. Inside Sebastian, with every smile Vanessa addressed into the pumped-up handsome man, jealousy boiled more and more strongly. But the man was in no hurry to come ashore, along with the raging jealousy. In the soul of the man woke up in self-doubt. Did I not look good enough like this guy? If she lets herself openly flirt with him, Sebastian thought, nor do you word see. It poured in yet all year. Finally, the strange young man left Vanessa, returning to his cabin. In farewell, the guy showed the girl some kind of gesture, but Sebastian could not see it. Vanessa escorted the young one out. The two men were coquettishly and smiling in parallel, twirling their hair on their finger. Sebastian stayed in the cold water for a while longer, but when he returned to his wife on the shore, he could not say a word about the acquaintance he had just witnessed. The man kept silent about the situation that was weighing on his heart. Vanessa noticed that something was wrong with her husband and tried to question him, but this conversation only led to a scandal. "What's the problem?" "Just answer it," shouted Vanessa. "What's the problem? Just leave me alone." Sighing angrily, Sebastian asked. This quarrel was heard by all the inhabitants of the neighboring cottages. For the good of everyone and themselves, the young people calmed down as darkness fell, and so as not to disturb anyone's sleep, went to bed early on opposite sides of the bed with their backs turned to each other. The next morning, Vanessa and Sebastian continued to ignore each other. It was their first protracted argument. Usually, someone alone would accept defeat and leave their partner to win by conceding. More often than not, it was Sebastian who took the loser's position in the argument, but today no one wanted to take the back. In any case, the two of them were not going to sit at home, and silently looking at each other, began to nervously collect food, drinks, and air mattresses. Vanessa, as usual, went into the water only on the ladder. Sebastian, ignoring his wife, swam away and started diving to the bottom again, picking up starfish and interesting shells. Vanessa, lying on the wooden chaise longue, was thinking about what was oppressing her husband and whether she was right to aggressively beat out the details from him yesterday. The girl's musings were interrupted by a male voice, familiar from yesterday. "Were you the one yelling yesterday?" Vanessa raised herself up, taking a half-sitting position, and saw in front of her a tanned guy about her age, whom she had met yesterday. "So you heard it too?" the girl said wistfully. "And who hasn't heard?" laughed the guy. "Did something happen to you?" The young man sat down next to her, casually dropping a playful glance at the married girl's legs. Vanessa pretended not to notice the guy's hints. "Paved," she said. "She had a fight with her husband, that's all." The young man, whose name, as Vanessa had already learned, was John, almost gave out his surprise and disappointment, but immediately pulled himself together. "Where is your husband? A conspiracy?" Smiling, asked John. "Yes, to London." Vanessa pointed to the open sea. John sat down a little, and soon he could make out an oxygen conduction tube sticking out of the water not far from the cliff. The young man laughed mockingly. "Why would he need an underwater tube?" "He could run into a wave, right?" "Yes." "And he would drown." "Huh," the young man mockingly said. "I told him the same thing when we were packing, but he didn't want to go, huh?" While the sea is calm, you can swim near the rocks and look at the hedgehogs. What a fool. Vanessa was indignant. John laughed even harder. They talked some more about Sebastian's stupidity. And then John asked if he had gone diving yesterday. And yesterday, the girl said unhappily. Doesn't he spend time with you at all? John asked a leading question. The girl looked at the young man with her mouth wide open as if she were about to object, but suddenly fell into a stupor, thinking. Noticing Vanessa's confusion, John, once again ramming a judgmental laugh, clearly Sebastian's, said, I see the young people were silent for a while, looking at Sebastian floating underwater. And then Vanessa's calm voice rang out. You know, she began, I didn't even think about it. Until you asked. John smiled warmly. Let's talk about you, the young man suggested. Let's do it! Vanessa agreed eagerly. So, continued the girl, we don't even have any common hobbies. I love him, but I feel myself getting cold. John listened without interrupting, looking carefully into the girl's eyes. The thing is that in our relationship from the research of it and for your bear for she de boire, a higher pay. There was no passion. Well, with this man, I was interested to communicate on various topics, but no more. He and I are too different, you know? It was interesting. The guy made a clarifying emphasis. Vanessa, I thought for a second. I don't know. She hesitated. I don't feel a spark. I get the impression that we've been married for not just 1 year, but a whole 20 years. Are you saying you're bored being married to this man? Holding back a snide smirk, John asked. Yes, exclaimed Vanessa, with a wave of her hands. Except that I love him and I don't understand at all what I should do. The girl folded her arms across her chest frustratedly, leaning against the back of the chaise lounge. John looked at her, smiling with the corner of his lips. Would you like some advice? He asked. Vanessa's eyes intrigued, sparkling. But the girl tossed it. The girl, relax, easily said, shouted Vanessa. I didn't finish, John said hastily. Relax. This version of something new. The young man glidingly touched the girl's ankle. Something to diversify your boredom. Finishing the sentence, John leisurely removed the hand that had already reached Vanessa's knee and glanced at it one last time along the girl's body. Vanessa blushed, either from indignation or from the sudden feelings of desire. What are you implying? The intonation of the question was not as strict as the girl had planned, and the trembling voice gave away Vanessa's embarrassment. John only hummed intricately in response. Standing up from the chaise lounge, the young man took a step to the side, turned to the girl and said, Goodbye. I live in cabin number 13. Come back if you miss me at all, the guy hinted openly and hurried away in the direction of the base. What the hell was that? Vanessa's mind was spinning. No, what was it with me? Suddenly, the girl caught a barely audible cry for help. It was her husband. Vanessa immediately jumped up from the lounger and kept her gaze fixed on Sebastian, who, still near the rocks, was waving his hand from under the water, grasping at the last hopes of escape. Fearing that time was running out, Vanessa ran straight to the rescue box. This early in the morning, there is usually no one on the beach except larks, loners, travelers, and athletes. This time, too, the shore was empty. Everyone who was not lazy was huddled in the warmth of their houses. Today, Alsop was lucky to go to the beach at such a time. A girl ran up to the booth, cursing yesterday's argument, and even John, who had managed to distract her from Sebastian, whose mattress had been blown further away from the shore by the current. The apparently sleeping lifeguard responded lazily to furious knocks on the iron door. Answering the bolt, he saw a young dark-haired girl in a bathing suit on the threshold. But before he could even say a word, she pounced on him. With a thunderous storm, She grabbed him firmly by the forearm and pulled him almost down the stairs. "Can you explain to me again what happened?" "The girl can barely keep up with Vanessa," the man demanded an explanation. "He's drowning. He's going to drown, please," Vanessa repeated confusedly. The rescuers had no choice but to follow her, and so they arrived at the scene. Vanessa couldn't see Sebastian in the water. The male lifeguard swam to the spot Vanessa had pointed out on the boat, and the girl asked to go with him. Sebastian was indeed nowhere to be seen, at least not on the surface of the water. Vanessa started everything up, and stammering with sobs, began to beg the rescuer to dive into the water to find her ideally alive spouse. Reluctantly, the man agreed and left the girl on the surface of the boat, instructing her to watch underwater traffic. Sebastian managed to be found at the very bottom, said. He was unconscious and a serious hematoma was visible on the back of his neck from the violent impact of the rocks. Fortunately, the man was saved, but unfortunately his legs were paralyzed. Sebastian was carried away by the wave when he began to choke. The man did not have time to do anything and grab onto anything with his hands. The wave hit him and knocked him into a rocky cliff, and the young man completely lost consciousness. The blow came to the area of the bone marrow, which caused further serious paralysis. The unfortunate newlyweds had to immediately leave the resort town and head home. Sebastian became wheelchair-bound. The man was dismissed from work, and the pension fund wrote him a monetary allowance as for a disabled person of the second group. From that moment, the life of the spouse changed categorically for the worse. They say that grief brings people closer together, but this was clearly a case of exception. Vanessa had to work for two. She almost stopped leaving the office, where her workplace as a journalist was located. Sebastian, on the other hand, instead of coping with the proud Shalem, Almeric held the difficulties that had already arisen, only fanned new jealousies and insecurities about himself, which the man never spoke to his wife about.
Only increased. Vanessa came home very tired, and along with the impotence came the monotonous attacks from her husband, who every night expressed his suspicions to his wife. It seemed to him that Vanessa is not in the office until night sits in the apartment of some man who, according to Sebastian, is better than himself in 1,000 times. Money became seriously scarce. Vanessa decided on desperate measures to ask her boss for a second position. Sitting in Robert's office, the girl carefully tried to find words about how a girl, her position, who had barely graduated from university, who had not yet had time to gain enough experience, would be able to fulfill the duties for two employees. "Why do you need a second job at all?" the boss asked. Vanessa nervously wiped her sweaty palms on her pay and said, "My husband, you see, he whole office already knows what's wrong with your husband." "That's not what I mean," Robert interrupted the employee. "What is it about?" Vanessa asked frantically. "You know you can easily get what you want without a lot of hard work and overwork." Barely moving his lips, said the boss in a low, mesmerizing voice. More excitement came up to Vanessa's throat. A worried expression escaped her lips. "What do you mean?" Robert got up from his bulky chair and walked around the girl from the back, put his hand on her shoulder, and began to massage it roughly, bringing his palm wider up to her neck, trailing her hair. "You know exactly what I mean," half-voiced threatened the superior. The girl did not bitch and jumped up from her chair, turning around to face Robert. "If you mean what I think you mean, then no, no, and no. Again," Vanessa exclaimed. "My advice to you," Robert's voice was intimidatingly menacing, "stop breaking down and you can work here for top wages and get bonuses every month." "Think it over, Vanessa Alsop." He uttered the last word through his teeth, spitting it squeamishly in the girl's direction. "I beg you, give me a second job. I don't need all this unhappiness you're talking about.
I'm willing to sit here till late at night if I can get my honestly earned money in full. I don't want anything more, begged Vanessa. Vanessa called out to the office employee. Robert pounded both palms on the table. I've already told you how to get what you want. And believe me, it's the best business proposition of your life. Cracked the boss, baring his white teeth. At any rate, he sighed, settling back into his chair. I've offered you this outcome so many times. You should have accepted it by now. I'm not selling, Robert, the girl said firmly. Really? Said the boss cheerfully. Well, we'll see about that. Go on. You give me a part-time job, hoping for favor from the head of the office, asked Vanessa. The boss laughed. I'm not going to explain it a second time. No, period, he said, losing all interest in the girl. Vanessa returned home with nothing. Her husband's lifeless voice came from the living room. Vanessa leisurely undressed, took off her coat, and, going into the room, tiredly collapsed on the sofa. Are you ignoring me? Ahead of her gaze, asked the question Sebastian. The spouse helplessly turned her head towards her husband. Hello to you, too. Ignoring the man's menacing tone, she said. Sebastian moved a little closer in the chair. I ask you, where have you been? Again, he asked. The girl did not answer him in annoyance, pressing her lips together. I'm asking you. The man's voice grew more and more grim with each word. Enough! Exclaimed Vanessa, interrupting further repetition of the question. That's what I thought, Sebastian said, satisfied, leaning back against the back of the stroller. But if not at work, then where? That's just it. Flashy, bellowed Vanessa in the direction of her husband. You keep accusing me of things I don't do. And you wait for me to give you the right answer, which you eagerly want to hear, only to once again label me a bad wife. I'm tired of this, Sebastian. I'm working weekends, staying late at the office just so we have a chance to survive. And all you do is resent me endlessly. You don't even help me around the house, even though your hands are perfectly fine, huh? Sebastian, eyes rounded, in a daze watching his wife's hysterics. Deep down, the man probably realized that Vanessa was right, but he couldn't get a hold of himself. He stopped answering his wife, silently listening to her cries. Then they both went to bed without speaking to each other. The next day was unremarkable. In the evening, Vanessa stayed in the office as usual. One of the last to finish another dissertation, which was supposed to influence what kind of work Vanessa would be allowed to do for later writing, but it was not going well. Vanessa was very tired, unable to concentrate for a long time. Soon she was left all alone in the office. Robert came out to the girl. What is it like? Ambiguously asked the young man. It's fine. Could you give me the keys? I'm going home when I do my work. Oh no, that's unacceptable, the man muttered, closing the office door behind him. Vanessa was puzzled for no reason by the superior's refusal. But after all, in the previous days, you allowed I wanted to charge and the girl. It is unacceptable to leave such a nice, defenseless, obviously standing girl here alone flirting, said Robert, looming over the girl. Everything inside Vanessa clenched with fear. It was just the two of them in the office, anticipating the terrible. The journalist silently watched the man's careful movements. Surprisingly, Robert pushed a chair from under the neighboring desk and silently sat on it, turning its back forward. Relax, I won't hurt you, the boss tried to reassure the girl. In Vanessa's head flashed her boyfriend from the resort, John. Relax. The girl brushed off the intrusive thoughts and looked at Robert again. I can see your side. You think I offer every girl this kind of job? Well, I don't. You're the only one I see burning potential in. But the hardships you're facing are depressing. Hurt the fire. The young boss went on. I just want to help you, but I don't understand why you're so opposed to it. Maybe because I don't want to cheat on my husband. All from Villa Vanessa. Robert smirked at his husband, stretched out. When was the last time you had sex? Vanessa? Stop talking to me about such topics, please. Lowering her eyes, Vanessa asked. Robert laughed again, in a more extended way. Okay, tell me you're happy. I'll get up, he commanded. What the hell difference does it make? Vanessa was indignant. The man rose to his feet and came close to the girl. Answer me, Robert ordered, taking the girl by the chin, not allowing her to look away. For a few seconds, Vanessa stared at him, frightened and confused, unable to utter a word. But gathering her strength, Vanessa blurted out in the man's face. Happy, happy, satisfied. The man was clearly not satisfied with the answer, because the next moment he leaned over, so that his face was level with Vanessa's. Anna frowned. Other eyebrows didn't bode well. Happy people don't need help, the young man whispered, touching the tip of the girl's nose with his lips. Vanessa remained silent. She was ready to escape from the office at any lucky moment, but at the same time she wanted to drop everything here and now and fly into the dangerous embrace of fate. Robert felt the girl's heavy breathing. As it turned out, it was enough for him to decide on the first desperate step. The head of the journalism department nestled against Vanessa's plump lips, covering them with his own. The girl guest stars chased from surprise, but did not push away. Moreover, when the short kiss was interrupted, Vanessa herself insisted on its continuation, lingering closer to Robert. The man grabbed the girl's hair and pulled it back, pushing Vanessa's head back, and looked into her eyes, pulling away. What on earth am I doing? With a note of regret in his voice, Vanessa mumbled. You don't have to pretend to be a good girl if there's a flame of devilish desire in your eyes, Robert advised. They continued to stare at each other, and the waiting was difficult for this girl. She slithered back and forth in her chair in absurd excitement, then averted her trailing eyes, pondering the propriety of her action. You can stop me at any time. Just say the word, the man assured her. In Vanessa's head was born 1,000 doubts, physical and mental fatigue, stress, resentment towards her husband. All these factors merged into a single cacophony of thoughts, preventing the girl from grasping common sense. Her head began to splinter. Vanessa grasped the edge of her boss's melted shirt with one hand, and with the other, the sleeve of his jacket, as if she couldn't get up. The girl lowered her eyes to the young man's chest, then lifted her gaze to his lips and pulled Robert's clothes toward her. They merged again in a kiss. This time, it was an agonizingly long one for Vanessa. Robert again pulled away from the girl slightly, but did not spill out but continued to stand, leaning slightly into her face. In Vanessa's distress, with his eyes, the young man in one sharp movement lifted her in his arms, holding the girl's hips with his hands, and sat her down on the desktop, scattering all the various documents and other tinsel on the floor. After that, long pauses between kisses between colleagues did not occur. Upon returning home, the girl found that Sebastian had already fallen asleep, having never waited for her arrival. Only now, Vanessa bothered to look at the time. The clock showed long past 11:00. Whoa. And Vanessa realized that she had entered the house much later than usual. On top of everything else, Vanessa's boss had arranged for her to take the next day off. The girl was indeed very tired, so without even bothering to undress, she lay down on the bed and fell asleep. Vanessa woke up from a nightmare. It had been so long since she'd had a dream that now this third-person horror felt especially real. A dark room, a desk in the middle of the room. She herself, Robert R., by his own brushing, stroking the girl's thigh, and Sebastian watching from the sidelines. Vanessa tried to tell her husband that it wasn't her, that she was right there looking at a second version of herself, and didn't understand what was going on. But the man didn't seem to notice her. "Why are you doing this to me?" said Sebastian from the dream, looking doomedly into the void, thus escorting their girl's fierce feelings of guilt and herself. Vanessa rose abruptly from the couch, trying to catch her breath properly. She didn't find her husband nearby, scared that he had figured it out and left her. The girl began to fuss around looking for her phone. From the kitchen came the familiar sound of the schooling wheel. Vanessa froze even harder, anticipating a heavy conversation. But nothing of the sort happened. "Do you have the day off today?" asked the man. "Yes." With a lump stuck in her throat, Vanessa replied excitedly. For the first time in many months, the husband smiled warmly, dedicating that smile to Vanessa. "Are you going to eat?" he asked kindly. "What is there to eat?" the girl asked cautiously. After a short but pleasant conversation, Sebastian retreated to the kitchen to pour pancakes, and Vanessa hurried to the bathroom to wash off last night. When the girl came out of the shower, she walked to the kitchen and found a warm breakfast on the table. "Sit down," softly said the man. Vanessa sat down, still continuing to tensely expect some trick from the side. Her husband's behavior. "Are you all right?" Sebastian asked worriedly. The girl trembled at the sudden attention to herself. "Yes, you are," she said. "All praise for the diva inside. You won't think I'm at it again. You just look pale." The man justified himself. Vanessa felt a droplet of sweat trickle down her nose. "Perhaps I have a slight cold," Vanessa mumbled. Her husband frantically searched for medicine in the bottom drawer of the tabletop. The girl watched with bated breath. "Here." "It should help with the cold," Sebastian said, holding out some pills to his wife. "Sebastian, what's going on?" Vanessa couldn't stand it. Her husband looked at Vanessa in bewilderment and looked at her for a long time. "What do you mean?" He sounded surprised. With difficulty, she made eye contact with Sebastian. The girl hurried to explain. "You're making me breakfast, taking care of my condition." Even Vanessa laughed. A lump of fear came to my throat again. "You don't even give me the daily interrogation about where they disappear to at night, which is already ingrained in my to-do list for the day." The man smiled guiltily and placing the pills on the table, spoke. "I've been thinking, and realized that you're right, Vanessa," he began. "My current situation is no reason to give up. Together, we can cope with all the difficulties. I am now ready to help you with everything. At the first opportunity, I'm sure if we try hard, it will definitely get better after a while." The girl did not blink, looked at the floor, afraid to move. Tears began to come to her eyes. "Hey, what are you doing, honey?" Sebastian got worried and gently touched Vanessa's hand. She couldn't help herself and burst into tears, covering her face with her free hand. "Do I have to tell you something?" Vanessa mumbled through her tears. Her husband did not answer anything, but continued to look at his wife, showing her his readiness to listen to every word. "Yesterday, I was in a very strong offense to you, and, in general, the girl told everything that happened. At the same time, I repented to Sebastian for what I had done." The man listened, did not interrupt, and with each passing minute his gaze became darker. Hands all weaker Stetskef, or the palm of his spouse until he was withdrawn. The girl, having finished the story, did not stop crying, looking at her husband in the hope of hearing words of forgiveness and support. "I have something to tell you, too." His preternaturally walking voice rang out. Vanessa's sobs subsided. The girl was ready to listen to Sebastian's story, but in the back of her mind, she hoped that his story would also turn out to be treason. "I was paralyzed by my own stupidity," Sebastian began the story. What do you mean, sobs? Vanessa asked again. The man took a deep breath, choosing his words, and continued. You were on the beach with some guy the whole time. I saw you looking at each other, talking about something. Sebastian wanted to change her husband's mind. Wife, be quiet. Abruptly, but without unnecessary rudeness, interrupted his wife Sebastian. I thought that you are more interesting with some left half-naked handsome man in the style of Justin Bieber rather than with me. I didn't make a scene, but is that why you were walking around with a sour face, not wanting to discuss anything? Wiping away tears? Vanessa asked a little assertively. Yes. That's why, wanting to finish quickly, the man answered. The next day, the situation was repeated. I saw how freely you chatted with that guy, how he touched you, sitting next to you. Sebastian's voice had acquired an unnatural backbone to it. I got upset and thought if I started drowning, she wouldn't even notice. Sebastian, you! A frightened look in the eyes of Vanessa's spouse. I wanted to fake it. I wanted to test your love. And how did you test it? Vanessa shouted in a fit of hysterics, throwing a hysterical look at her husband's feet. Sebastian gave a slight waggle of his eyebrow and said, not hiding the hint. Tonight, for sure. Vanessa lowered her eyes shamefully, remembering her own transgression. Sebastian continued, I didn't know what I was capable of. I ran out of oxygen. Unfortunately, I could not swim to the surface. The surf was strong. The waves, the intervals between which were just enough to inhale a little more oxygen, risking to choke on the salt water and bring a short cry for help. The waves were merciless. Soon, I saw the largest of them, which was moving at breakneck speed right at me. I didn't even have time to grab a rock. The rock was still a few meters away. I was swept over by the icy sea and was carried straight to the very rocks I was trying to swim to. I remember how in a second I felt the blows of some Schurshof and the surface with the back of my head. Then I seemed to pass out. The man was silent, once again immersed in the events of that day. Sebastian stared at one point. Vanessa's lips tightened at him, holding back the impulse to answer her spouse, or shrugging guiltily at his shirt. I tried to stop thinking about you that way. Suddenly, the man's voice came again. I tried to suppress that unbearable feeling of jealousy, but my guess was right. How ironic. Can you hear yourself? Vanessa shouted. I've been faithful to you all this time and never even thought about passing on. You've been living in anticipation of this occasion so you could tell me. And I told you I was tired of you always suspecting me of everything. So you had to fulfill my expectations. In your mind, it's my fault that you cheated on me? Exclaimed the husband. I am not trying to blame you, Vanessa replied in a calmer tone. I just want to explain to you the reason for my actions and tell you that you are not a saint either. I'm not a saint, Sebastian shouted with bad irony, but at least I never cheated on you, even when I had the perfect opportunity. It's not about opportunities now, Sebastian, Vanessa urged her husband. You know what it is? Not controlling the growing tantrum, Sebastian asked venomously. Without waiting for an answer, he continued. Remember, our neighbor pestered me to visit? She did. When the matter smelled hot, I left immediately, not throwing myself at the feet of a stranger, forgetting about his marriage just because I was tired of something there. The last phrase, he deliberately distorted the left voice, parodying the words of the girl. And at least I'm not trying to prove to someone that I'm not so insignificant through the pressure of pity. I'm not engaging in pointless self-abuse just to let everyone know how much I'm suffering. Actively articulate, the wife stated. Their quarrel could have gone on forever, had either of them not decided to take a desperate step. Get out of this house, snapped to rudeness, shouted Sebastian. But I will, the wife exclaimed. And so they went their separate ways. Vanessa left by cab to the boss, who so kindly decided to shelter the girl. And Sebastian was left alone in a gray one-bedroom, which at least somehow decorated the presence of his wife without the help of extra hands. Robert, after all Vanessa's explanations, allowed the girl to stay at his place until she found another place to live. But after a few nights spent together at Robert's initiative, Vanessa stayed with the young man for good. Vanessa and Robert started an unofficial relationship. The girl divorced to Sebastian. The boss promoted Vanessa and began to give her bonuses every month. Such a special approach to a young employee without experience on the part of Robert did not go unnoticed by colleagues. The other employees began to treat the girl worse, to incite her to a conflict objectively, not the most decent statements, sprinkled with ambiguous overtones. Vanessa's such treatment of herself was very upsetting, once she could not stand the collective ridicule and told everything to her boss. "They think I'm a suck-up. Your personal night butterfly," said the girl, sitting on a specially allocated for employees chair in the office, Robert. "Do you want to go back to your old position?" Robert said without much enthusiasm. "No, I'd like you to officially tell them why I was promoted," Vanessa said. "Because you're my night butterfly." The boss grinned with a quirk of his lips. Vanessa stared at her roommate, brows furrowed indignantly. "Getting used to my new position." "You asked me for a second job," insulted Robert. I'm in a mood for jokes," Robert said. "Do I look like a joker?" the man questioned menacingly. Vanessa laughed, having lost her original thought. "Now listen to me," Robert commanded in a beautiful tone. "You're good at your new job in bed, but you wouldn't have gotten to the paycheck you have now without the valuable, learned skill you've acquired. That's one. 2. I sheltered you in my house, let you sleep in a warm bed with me. But if you think my benevolence is selfless, you're sorely mistaken. Free cheese only comes in a mousetrap. Nevertheless, you must be content with what you have now or freely." Robert E., having finished his speech, waved his hand and buried himself with his eyes in some documents, which carefully read. Until Vanessa came, I thought. Vanessa's timid voice sounded. "I thought you loved me, Robert," Robert replied without looking up at her. "Like any leader, I appreciate it when a mentee does a really good job. That's what you and I are doing, not love?" 2 months had passed. I tried to get Vanessa to sympathize with the man. He looked at her, rolled his eyes, explained grudgingly. "You give yourself and get money in exchange for a prestigious job and a roof over your head." "That sounds pretty straightforward to me, Vanessa." "I'm just an expendable material for you," the girl shouted, holding back the tears coming to her throat. "Luxury expendable material, please note." "Playing offended," exclaimed the man, to whom I gave all the conditions for even more luxury, by the way. "You mean you didn't settle down?" Vanessa. "Everything that happened between us means nothing to you," Robert began, rubbing his eyes. "Tell me, have I ever deceived you?" He asked a rhetorical question. "Have I ever told you that I love you?" But are you going to keep talking about the love between us that you made up? Or are you going to do your job as a journalist? Vanessa stopped trying to get through to the young man. If there was anything to knock it all, she ran out of the office in tears, to the delight of her colleagues. The girl ran into the bathroom and couldn't calm down for the next half hour. She was more offended and hurt, because all this time Robert had been so kind to her. She felt like she was behind a man like a stone wall. She had thought he could protect her from the attacks of the ignorant, keep her safe. And he himself, as it turns out, mocks Vanessa. I thought he saw her as a talent and supported her financially, but apparently he saw her purely as a corrupt and unremarkable person. The entire half hour that the journalist sat in the bathroom, wrapped in a hopeless measure, deeds. The girl cried, not only out of self-pity, but also out of hatred. Not only from the realization of the injustice of this world, but also from devouring all living things in its path. Guilt before her ex-husband, remembering and detaching with these fragments of her life. Vanessa recalled that men always perceived her only as a piece of flesh with the orifices they needed, not noticing her sincerity, not listening to her thoughts about the world, not interested in her personality. They all wanted only one thing from Vanessa: sex, all except Sebastian. Probably that's why the girl gave her preference to him. So awkwardly him. Not charming and not too attractive, but the most real and sincerely loving of all men that the girl managed to meet. The second Vanessa thought of her husband's sincere, unselfish love, she wanted to drop everything right now, run to him, talk to him, and come back. The desire arose so suddenly, and in a matter of seconds, turned into a real tornado, which was impossible to contain. That girl immediately rushed out of the office, accompanied by dozens, stunned, mockingly eyes of curious colleagues. It was not too late in the evening. Vanessa quickly made her way to Sebastian's rented apartment, the one the two of them used to rent. Her heart was racing. She was seriously worried that Sebastian had moved out, couldn't pay the rent, or something had happened to him because he had been on his own for 2 months now. Deprived of both financial and physical help, Vanessa timidly knocked on the door. For a long time, no one opened, but suddenly the insistent voice of Sebastian someone was heard behind the wall. The girl hesitated, her throat dry. Once again, Vanessa spoke up. "It's me, Vanessa." There was a brief silence outside the door. Vanessa asked the man, surprised, but without too much hatred. The girl was about to say something, but the lock was moving. In the passage, Vanessa saw the ex-husband of the wheelchair user. By the way, Vanessa noticed that the young man looked much better and fresher than in their last meeting. For some reason, there was a resurgence of appeasement to painful indifference. Sebastian's voice. "Sebastian, we need to talk. We made a mistake," Vanessa said quickly. Her voice cracked from her recent tantrum, as if she was afraid that her once-born man would shut the door in her face without bothering to listen. "I agree," Sebastian replied. "We made the mistake of meeting at the prom." The man began to close the door slowly, but his face, in addition to the indifference, which seemed to the girl to be overplayed, also expressed a little doubt. "Stop!" Vanessa held up her hand and the handle of the door. "What are you doing?" exclaimed the young man. "I'm going to call the police now if you don't leave. I'm trying to make things right. I'm asking for just one conversation," Vanessa pleaded. Sebastian glanced at her hand, supporting the door, looked at his own, which was parallel to the doorknob, and grudgingly mumbled, "Okay." The girl glowed with happiness, but quickly hid it. "Throat." The tears came again. The conversation was not quick and difficult. Vanessa apologized and repented, telling everything that happened to her all these days and how she missed her ex-husband, remembering him, but stopping herself from trying to give the past another chance. She told her about today's incident as well. She lost one toy and decided to come back to me. "Yes, more sad than hurt," Sebastian said. The girl was ready to be outraged, but in time turned away from NTV, considering that the former spouse has the right to such statements. "I am very sorry for what I have done. I am, I confess, very inexperienced in such matters. I could be divorced like a stray mongrel fed poisoned meat. I'd like to try to make things right. I'm willing to try to make it right." "Sebastian!" Vanessa exclaimed, begging for another chance. The young man was silent. It was noticeable that he was having all kinds of thoughts and doubts. "I love you," Vanessa exclaimed, in an attempt to win her husband back. Sebastian reacted sharply to these words by looking into her eyes, this time deliberately and even threateningly. Vanessa almost shuddered at such an attentive reaction. but she didn't dare to look away. "I hate you!" Vanessa, lowering her voice, responded to Sebastian's words. An unpleasant chill ran down Vanessa's body. "Are you lying?" she shouted, trying to assure herself that she was. But he wasn't lying. And if he was afraid to admit it to himself. Vanessa had to leave. Coming out of the entryway, the girl met Wendy, that former neighbor, who had been slandered by the entire entryway, accusing her of lewd behavior and making theories on the method of her livelihood. The red-headed bestie paused. Give Vanessa a look. "Hey you!" Wendy exclaimed. Vanessa turned around. "Are you the ex-wife?" Once again, the red-haired girl raised her voice. Vanessa still remained silent, with a three-burned look at the girl. "Wow!" shrieked the one. "I didn't expect to meet you and leave things here." The dark-haired girl continued to remain silent, staring unhappily at her former neighbor, as if a wild panther waiting for the perfect moment to attack. "You know, I was divorced once too," Wendy said sympathetically, head down. "But Sebastian stood by me. He's a good man, not like my ex. I can't imagine how someone like him could ever cheat." She wouldn't shut up, hoping to piss Vanessa off. "Look, what do you want from me?" Tiredly, but with hidden hatred in her tone, asked Vanessa. The young girl waved her hands, showing her defenselessness to Vanessa. "Nothing, nothing. Squeaky Lana, just wanted to share some good news with you. I'm pregnant. Sebastian's gonna be a daddy soon." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. "Daddy how?" she asked absent-mindedly, like she was going to faint. "Well, that's how serious we are," said the girl next door. "I thought he told you." But Vanessa wasn't listening. She ran out of the doorway, her lips tightened in despair, and ran away, not caring what road she took. Vanessa stopped at a bench in the park. She collapsed on the bed and sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Suddenly, her phone rang. She frantically pulled her smartphone out of her pocket. It was Robert Berdamsai. Vanessa, realizing in advance what awaited her. She picked up the phone. "Hello, are you done playing, Mouse?" There was a disgustingly happy voice of the boss. "Look for your things under the windows." "I had too little time to put them neatly into your lame bags. By the way, you don't have to come to work tomorrow, or the day after that, or ever." After these words, a gloating laugh came from the Spirit speaker. "Fuck you! Fuck you!" Vanessa shouted insults into the receiver. The laughter stopped. In a voice as cold as a knife blade, Robert said, "You're going to have to leave. Unless you want a trial." A mouse was caught in a cage. The mouse tried to grab a lucky chance, but he didn't think straight. "Remember, you stupid bitch, there's nothing to take from you except your wonderful body parts, but even those get boring after a while. No one will ever look at you for more than a thing." Robert canceled the call. A mocking long beep sounded from the speaker, indicating that Vanessa was nowhere else to be found. The girl, gathering her last strength, wiped her tears at the bus station, trying not to think about anything, and bought a ticket for tomorrow's flight to her parents' home in her native village. In just one single day, she had lost everything. There was nothing more for her to do in this town. With the remaining money, Vanessa rented a room in a hotel for one night and fell into a deep sleep. On her way home, she also tried to think less and sleep more. Sleep heals the wounds of the soul, or at least dulls them for a while. It would really help if the bus didn't bounce on the scraps. What was frequenting the road as it approached the village? Vanessa announced her imminent arrival to her parents' home village while already on the bus. This unexpected news did not take her father and mother by surprise. On the contrary, they were happy to see their daughter at last. But telling how you are doing, how on a personal fuss over the stove, agitated, flooded the daughter with questions. "Mom, No way, Mom, Vanessa said sadly, lazily stirring sugar with a spoon in the mugs with tea. Mom and I have been waiting for you, my daughter. Kevin, the girl's father, stretched out. Would you at least send a text message? Oh, wait. You and your texting old shot Jenna, Vanessa's mother. Vanessa had something going on. Are you making your jokes here? What's the matter? Kevin is stunned. Who needs a face painting? Daughter, tell me. Mom, exclaimed Vanessa. What, Mom? Tell us what happened? The woman said worriedly, sitting down at the table across from Vanessa. The father stood motionless in the doorway, glancing at his wife and daughter. The girl recounted everything that had happened to her over the past few months. Avoiding details, Vanessa's mother silently covered her mouth with the palm of her hand in shock, then, without holding back, waved indignantly and left. Kevin, on the other hand, could barely contain the rush coming to the vessels in his head. A thirst for revenge. Suddenly, at the end of the story, the man could not hold back a gust of anger, and through gritted teeth went through, I'll kill the bastard. I'll kill him. Who exactly, you fool? Jenna jumped into the conversation. How's that? Robert's father was surprised. That one. And our former son-in-law, you mean, is not worthy of your blows? The mother was indignant. What's he doing? Perplexed? Asked Kevin. Getting up from the chair, Jenna put her arms at her sides and stood with her back to wall. So society hopper da war corpi and Bruce could see her face and listen to her words. Kevin, the fact he has no backbone is jealous of making himself look so pathetically miserable in front of our little girl, blaming her for her unfortunate fate. Vanessa herself was sternly affirmed by her mother. Let's not do this now, Vanessa asked. Yes, you're right, said Jenna, bestowing her daughter with a warm look. It's time to go to sleep. The morning is evening and ancient. A week has passed since then. Vanessa was about to leave, saying that she had already stayed late and did not want to bother her parents with her presence. But her father and mother assured her that she could stay in the house as long as she wished, for she could not interfere with them in any way. Vanessa was happy to be back at home, especially after what had happened to her in the city. Maintaining the farm and other household chores managed to distract the girl from her worries, and gradually her head began to come to order. After the hustle and bustle of the city, life in the village was a real treat. Winter came. Vanessa often went to work part-time with her father, shoveling snow off the roads. The work was not easy, but soon Vanessa could afford to buy a laptop. Initially, the girl's goal was not to throw away her pent-up skills in writing and journalism, improving her skills at home. But soon, Vanessa mastered the technique of freelancing, and for the first time was able to earn money remotely, taking an order to write an advertising article on the exchange for copywriting. Vanessa was happy that finally she found the right way to work and dream. If at first the girl, remembering her dismissal, thought that she had lost the last chance for a good income, and was already believing that no one on the planet, especially a man, will never see her true skill. But now, Vanessa was sure she had the right to build her own destiny. Gradually, the girl began to move toward her goal of becoming a more than sought-after author. After the new year, when it began to warm up, Vanessa began to go out more often, strolling through the local neighborhood. The girl often went outside to the territory of the abandoned boatyard, where in the days when the place was filled with human bustle, Vanessa had often visited with her father. Now, however, the place was empty. In some places, there still lay boats no longer villa, and in some places broken. The old wood had long ago eroded and collapsed to the ground. The girl wandered over the damp ground, caught in the moisture from the standing snow, and thought back to her childhood. Remembered the moment when, after graduating from college, she had fallen in love for the first time. So hard. She remembered hurriedly preparing for her wedding and wondering if this was definitely my man. It seemed to her that they were in a big hurry. But the love that 20-year-old Vanessa suffered pressed down on the very throat of Prudence until it completely strangled it. The wedding had taken place, and it was no longer possible to go back and think about everything again. The girl was dragged into a marriage that kept reminding her of how strong the demands on women by conservatives who claim that a living person owes something to someone. Vanessa was tired not only at work, but also at home, where her new husband proved to be a real psychological tyrant. Vanessa realized it only now. The pressure on pity and the eternal craving for hyper-control led to burnout in the couple. It didn't matter now, but Vanessa never planned to forget the experience. She was also mindful of the fact that most of the men she met on her life's journey, as bitter as it was, really, they wanted the same thing. It was frustrating for the girl and made her more and more disappointed with her fate, being a woman every day. Anyway, now Vanessa focused on the freelancing jobs she had to master. There was no time to despair, and after wandering around the Rotten by the dock some more, the girl wandered toward the exit over the fence. Vanessa bumped into a young boy about her own age. From the sudden surprise, the girl involuntarily jerked, emitting a barely audible, startled squeak. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," the blonde-haired stranger said, excusing himself. "Is everything all right?" Vanessa answered blankly. The guy was about to pass by, but suddenly stopped beside the girl, squinting suspiciously at her. Vanessa visibly tensed up. "Have we met somewhere before?" the guy asked. "I have no idea." With all appearance showing disinterest in these conversation, Vanessa threw Vanessa and then, slightly dismissing her neck, victoriously putting his hands in his pockets, the young man said with a smile on his face, "The password is mahogany." The girl's confusion lasted no more than 10 seconds. She almost immediately recognized in the blonde David her childhood friend. "Come on," Anna stretched out happily. Vanessa took a step towards her old friend, but he put his hand out in front of him and repeated with a serious expression, "The password is mahogany." "Oh, come on," exclaimed the girl, not stopping smiling widely. "For so many years, I remember his mahogany password." "Everyone," echoed the boy, looking at his friend nonchalantly. "Us all right." Wildly thinking, the girl surrendered, sinking even more deeply into the memories than before. After a few failed attempts, the so-called mahogany password the girl was still able to remember, the young people got to talking. The guys called the red tree a real tree in their childhood, which was not far from the boat station in the forest. The tree was not actually red, but it got its name for a reason. One day, the yard boys built a cabin on its thick branches. The house was built of ordinary wood, which in the future children painted with paint cans in red color for fun. Not everyone was allowed to visit it. For example, little Vanessa couldn't go there because the boys wouldn't let her. But David, her neighbor, was different from his friends and saw no point in having a war of the sexes. Besides, the boy considered Vanessa his friend. They often spent time together. David just happened to be a violator of the established rules of the cabin and brought Vanessa there. At first, the boys were displeased but got over it. After that, they decided to create a password from the cabin. And so that no one would understand what they were talking about, they called the very location of the lodge a redwood tree. Initial variants of names sounded a little different, but in the end they agreed on this one. The childhood Frennens were walking along a deserted forest path in search of that very place. "So tell me, what are you doing here?" "Throwing a warm look at the old friend?" asked the guy. "Yes, a little burrowed in the head?" began Vanessa. In my personal life is not good from work fired. And how are you? Not going anywhere yet? The girl changed the subject. I don't see the point in it yet. First, I'd like to realize myself somehow. And then dive into public life from the head. What did you realize yourself in? Vanessa looked at the boy with interest. I study languages, especially Latin. People, animals, their anatomy and physiology. I want to become a doctor, the young man said enthusiastically. So what happened there, and you will tell me. Not forgetting about the unfinished conversation about the life of his childhood friend. David asked the question again. Vanessa sighed heavily and started to tell from the beginning. Remember that guy they didn't like at university? I used to come here on vacation, and I often mentioned him. I remember, David nodded. But that was it, Vanessa continued, eventually telling the whole story of her short marriage. Gradually, bringing everything to the moment with the Sabas, David listened to the end, and then, after a minute of silence, answered, Cheating on someone you love is a terrible thing to do. But I'm not judging you in any way. You had your own reasons for doing it. I'm not making excuses for myself. I'm just telling it like it is. No doubt I did a very bad thing, but I'm tired of it. Do I understand you? Interrupted the boy. Yes. The girl exhaled a sigh of relief, realizing that next to this man can feel at ease, without fear of being judged for something. We came unexpectedly, said the young man. I'll state a fact. And indeed, after going around a couple of trees, the young people found themselves at the tallest, most stable, and beginning to bloom tree. There was no longer a house on it, only dangling. Miraculously, no. Spilling out pricks peeled rusty nails from the thick branches. Vanessa awed at the sudden rush of nostalgia that came over her. Do you remember how we used to fill balloons with water and play catch-up, throwing our families at each other? David asked a little sadly. I remember, the girl answered, walking almost close to the tree. David stood beside her and squatted down, gazing intently into the roots of the tree. What are you doing? Vanessa wondered. And then the boy clutched at the ground with his hands. Shoveling snow around one root made Vanessa uncomfortable. At first, she didn't realize she was trying to find her childhood friend, but soon a thought began to reach the girl. It was unlikely that they were still lying there. She spoke skeptically. You're so sure of that? The boy asked, still picking at the ground. Vanessa didn't answer anything. She watched with interest what would be the result of the young man's efforts. And indeed, after a while, the guy pulled out a small metal box from under a wide tree root. Come on, this is it! Exclaimed the girl, completely at a loss for words. David, you changed and carelessly brushed off the snow. Did you doubt it? He said jokingly. But after all these years, these letters might not have survived. So come on, don't hesitate to open the box, Vanessa insisted. And you're still as stubborn as ever, David said cordially. And you're just as naive, the girl exclaimed with a frown. The box was created at once. It was worth David to open this pike. Inside serenely lay 2 envelopes, slightly yellowed from the passage of time, and a heart-shaped cheek pendant. Vanessa carefully pulled the string on which the jewelry hung on herself. The pendant was the most ordinary, cheap, composed of clay. On the back were carved initials. I remember how hard you tried to make it. It was very crooked, but in its own way. This keychain is much more significant than the others of its kind, which is much better to look tactless, commented David. You are crooked yourself. It came out fine, said Vanessa with a hurt look on her cheeks. The guy only smirked at that and continued rummaging through the box, pulling out 2 paper envelopes. He held one out to the eyelid. The girl didn't resist, taking the paper and studying it from all sides. I thought they were long gone. Did someone find them? Or did the rain wash them away? The girl wondered. I thought so too, said David. But apparently, letters addressed to oneself in the future don't just disappear. And who would steal them? Everyone had long ago dispersed, as in the big cities. Vanessa suddenly felt her stomach twist pitifully with a sudden feeling of guilt. She wanted to say something, but David spoke again. Do you want to read it? He asked. But we have to read it out loud. Last time you never let me see your letters? Conditioned the girl. The young man laughed quietly. All right, he agreed. Vanessa heard him laugh for the first time in so many years. He was as atheistic as his voice, which had changed beyond recognition in so many years. Vanessa acted on the thought that she was looking too much like her grown-up childhood friend, and perked up. Stared at the envelope again. But what's a 1-2? David began to count down. The young men opened each their own letter, their own envelope. You go first. Look, boy, at the girl. Why me? You rate it? Okay, a little concerned. I gave in to David and started reading. Hi, I'm from the future. The letter began. The content of the text made Vanessa smile slowly, inadvertently sinking more and more into childhood memories. David from the past was asking himself in the letter if he could become the one who dreamed of having a dog and building a house in the countryside. Even bigger than the one his friends had built. You were jealous, it turns out? Vanessa smirked at him, curious. The boy smiled sadly, silently agreeing. David quickly ran his eyes over the next lines to see what the story was about. Without reading much, Vanessa caught some uncertainty in the guy's gaze. Folding the sheet in half, he said the ink was blurred after all. Vanessa questioned this statement and snatched the letter out of his hands before he woke up. What are you doing? David exclaimed, holding out his hand sharply. Vanessa reacted instantly, bounced to the side, running up behind a tree. David had no trouble catching up with the girl, but he took his time. It's not good to take personal belongings, David said, trying to subdue her. What are you afraid of? If the ink is blurred anyway, Vanessa said, hiding the piece of paper behind her back. The girl, keeping her eyes on the boy, carefully opened the note. David made an unconscious move to take the letter away from Vanessa, but for some reason he stopped himself and stood still. Vanessa looked at the boy incredulously and lowered her gaze to the writing. In addition to all of the above, I hope you're dating Vanessa. The girl's heart twitched. She is very kind, sweet, and beautiful. She likes to draw comics and tell stories. She reads a lot. My mom says she wants to see me behind a book just once. But I couldn't devote that much time to pronounced not letters. It's too boring, but listen to Vanessa's stories. I could go on forever. Would I wish she could always be there for me? After reading the last line of the letter, Vanessa covered her mouth with her hand. Could it be that all this time David was the one man who saw her as more than just a body and didn't see her as an object? Did you like me? She asked. David confirmed. What wasn't clear? He wondered. No, the girl exclaimed. They were both silent for a moment, immersed in their own thoughts. Why didn't you say so? Vanessa interrupted the silence. When I was very young, I thought you knew that. And when I decided to come clean, Sebastian showed up, David explained. The girl didn't know how to react. I hope I didn't push you away. The boy looked into the girl's eyes, wary. Vanessa perked up and washed her pitchfork. No, of course you didn't. What are you saying? I'm just surprised. Vanessa called out to the young man with a determination inconsistent with his pathforfear. Orkstad og bats. Albeshwassois smaver slatilas. Samar fatsak renes aspiren. Perhaps it's too late, and it's unlikely that we'll be able to communicate as we used to. But I will say that I still have strong feelings for you. Call it what you will, whether it be love or something else. But I really want to be with you. Hearing the confession that day, Vanessa was left stunned. She couldn't reciprocate the guy right away. But she realized for herself that with her childhood friend, she was connected not only by the past, but also by strong ties of friendship. The boy had always been kind to Vanessa, and if she had known about his feelings earlier, she would have chosen him. Vanessa liked David too, but she purposely forced herself not to look at him as more than a friend. Vanessa had never sought a relationship, and David to her was the one person she could always count on. Even if it was an inexperienced boy of 10 years, he was always ready to protect his friend. He was the one Vanessa felt like she belonged with. She didn't have to pretend to be someone, to go out of her way to please David. He was the man who had loved her with all his heart for so many years. He loved her so much that even when she chose another man, he did not interfere with her decision, accepting it completely. He was willing to sacrifice his own good for the happiness of his beloved. David grew up to be a truly resilient, strong, and selfless man. The young people began to meet and reacquaint themselves. The path was not going to be easy, but Vanessa knew it was worth it. After a couple of years, the couple decided to move in together. David went to medical school in another city. After saving up some money, David and Vanessa decided to move there. One day, Vanessa received a call from Sebastian, who decided to apologize for saying things to her. The man said that Wendy wasn't serious, not only about the romantic relationship, but also about her own child, who had just recently come into the world, completely hanging on to provide for her disabled child. Vanessa Poe sympathized with her ex-husband and offered to help, but he refused, citing that he had already made a mess of things, and on his own head. Having had a heart-to-heart talk, the former spouses parted on a good note, stipulating their own provinces. They came to the fact that they were too young and emotionally unstable. Having decided to enter into a marriage union, they had absolutely no idea that family is not just love and tenderness, but also a great responsibility. Vanessa continued writing electronic articles on writing forums and various exchanges, and became quite a good qualified specialist. Even took distance courses in journalism, which further increased the girl's professionalism. Vanessa's happiness turned out to be quite close. In the most prominent place, where she would not even have to look for it. But she got her life experience, and now she is not going to step on the same rake.